Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to have some fun with numbers and really small sample sizes through the first week and a half of the season. We'll talk about some potential overreactions that could be out there, some notable individual statistics, have a little bit of fun with it. Plus, we'll look at the matchup against the Denver Nuggets and who's going to guard Nikola Jokic, what else to look out for based on last year's season series and the playoff matchup against Denver. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves are back in action tonight. After not playing since Tuesday, they'll take a 2-2 record against at Target Center against the 2-2 Denver Nuggets. We'll talk about that matchup later in the show. Of course, plenty of data to go off of from the matchup last year. Of course, both teams have made changes. We'll talk through all that and how that changes the matchup between the two teams that met actually each of the last two seasons in the playoffs. So we'll get to that here in a little while. I want to spend roughly the first half of the show, though, talking about some potential overreactions. And I'm not a big overreaction guy, which, I'll talk about what some may see as a potential overreaction, and I'll talk about why those things are not things we should be overreacting to. Some fun with small sample size is another way to look at it. That's less of a catchy, that's not going to hit the chyron on the bottom of a sports channel or the bottom line on your favorite 4-letter sports channel either. But that's what I'm going to call it, is fun with small sample size. We'll do that here off the top. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Also, a reminder about our newsletter. The Locked On Wolves daily newsletter is your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now at lockedondaily.com. Again, lockedondaily.com. You can start your day with all the free the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Also, tonight, I'll be hosting the postcast with Jack Borman. I'll be filling in for Luke Inman this evening following Wolves Nuggets. So, roughly 11:30 or so, we'll go live and discuss the game. So check it out on YouTube on the Locked On Sports Minnesota channel. All right. Let's talk about some small sample size stuff. Why not, right? This is a lot of fun. We're going to do this really anytime we get a couple of days off. I think there's another 2-day break toward the end of next week, so we may do this again next week. But I think it's fun because it's a way to kind of track like what's going on. Obviously, it's so, by definition, a small sample size probably isn't telling us much. It's extremely noisy. But it's what we have right now for this season. It's what we have to go off of. And we're seeing it everywhere. A lot of times without that caveat, it's like when you're watching the World Series and they give you the World Series batted average, it's like, okay, batted average isn't a super helpful way to analyze this, right? And you take any 4-game stretch in the middle of the season and somebody's going to shoot well below or well above their average, free throw percentage or 3-point percentage or what have you. That said, we always magnify the first few games of the season. We all, same thing with the playoffs, obviously, because it's the playoffs. So it's not completely irrelevant. It's just kind of a goofy, snapshot. And as of now, we're 10 days in. That's what we have to go off of. So we're going to dig into a bit, talk about some things that really are standing out to me, mostly on the individual level, but a couple team things too. My favorite one is this. If you look at the Timberwolves, so we talked about the rotation the other day, about how they've only 9 guys have seen the court so far for the Wolves through 4 games, and really only 8 because Joe Ingles has played in every game, but he's only played 22 total minutes across 4 games. But of the 9 guys that have played, 6 of them are shooting more than half of their shot attempts from outside the arc. 6 of them have a 3-point attempt rate of greater than 0.5. The only 3 players that are not shooting more than half of their shots from outside the arc are Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. And of course, the cruel irony here is Julius Randle shooting 62.5% from three. I'm not going to sit here and advocate for Julius to be hoisting threes like crazy. But it's funny that like there's six guys shooting more than half their shots from three, and one of the three that's not is Rudy Gobert, who of course hasn't attempted a three. Another one is Jaden McDaniels, so that's okay. And then the other was Julius Randle, who's the one guy who's making threes besides Nikola Alexander Walker. Pretty fascinating stuff. Related to this, well, actually, we'll get to that here in a second. So that I think that's pretty interesting. And to this point, like remember last year, if you use cleaning the glasses numbers, the Timberwolves were number one in the entire league in 3-point percentage because they take out heaves and garbage time. If you look at Basketball Reference, they were third. I threw myself off the other day because I glanced at Basketball Reference and I was like, wait, I thought they were first. Cleaning the glass, they were first last year in 3-point percentage. This year, through 4 games, the Timberwolves are fourth at 3-point percentage, and they're second in 3-point rate as a team, which is crazy. Remember last year they finished like lower middle of the pack at 3-point attempt rate. So to see them second in attempt rate, they're seventh in attempts per game, but second in 3-point attempt rate and fourth in percentage is awesome. 39.5% as a team, and 6 of their 9 players are shooting more than half of their shot attempts from beyond the arc. One of the ones I just mentioned who's not is Julius Randle, who's 62.5% outside the arc, which, this early in the season, we could say the actual number of attempts. He's 10 of 16 outside the arc. Now, remember, one of my key concerns about this trade was Julius Randle's not anywhere near the 3-point shooter that Karl-Anthony Towns is, which is true. I'm not going back on that at all. Remember, last year he was in the 3-point contest. He ended up shooting 31% from 3 when it was all said and done. He also only played 46 games because he got hurt right after the All-Star break. The year prior was 34%, which is a shade below what league average was that year. The year prior to that, he was 31% again. But in 2020-21, he was 41% from outside the arc. He won Most Improved Player. That was his second team All-NBA season when he averaged 24 and 10. And again, 41.1% outside the arc. Now, clearly, like, we're talking about a dude that's now got 11 years of NBA experience, if you include his rookie season when he broke his leg in his first game ever. He's a career 33.5% 3-point shooter. The 41% is clearly an outlier. He had never been north of 35%, even 34.5% in any other season. That said, the volume increased around that time and has continued to increase. And I'm not at all saying that the 4-game sample here where he's shooting 62% for 3 means he's going to be over 40% again this year. But he has done it before. And I think the volume at which he's shooting threes is probably about right. It's actually a little bit lower than his 3-point rate ever since that season in New York. And we saw him be hesitant in game 1 this year against the Lakers to pull the trigger on threes for a little while. But ultimately, if he opens it up a little bit more and is still somewhat judicious, like I can handle 1 out of every 3 of his shot attempts being threes. If he's going to shoot at a league average-ish clip, he could be in the 34 to 36% range. I think to keep defenses honest, that is valuable. Now, we saw him hit the deep corner 3, double clutch, end of shot clock, fading behind the backboard. Like those types of shots, there's certainly been some good luck mixed in there. So I'm not at all saying, I'm not going to take this fun with small sample sizes and say, take it to the bank. Julius Randle's a 60% 3-point shooter. That's not what I'm saying. But it's fascinating that his 3-point attempt rate is lower. His percentage is much higher. And, it's a completely different environment. Completely different, structure, teammates around him than what it was in New York. So we'll see what that turns into. But again, moral of the story, 6 of the 9 Wolves players that have played so far this year are shooting more than half their shot attempts from outside the arc. And one of the 3 that's not is Julius Randle, who's shooting 63%. We talked about Nikhil briefly. He's at 67% from outside the arc. Nikola Alexander Walker is 10 of 15 so far, which is crazy. Remember, he struggled in the second and third rounds of the playoffs last year and in preseason this year. So that was going to bounce back eventually. And that'll be something else to monitor is what his number looks like here moving forward. All right, a couple more fun with small sample size notes that I want to get to here next before we get into the Wolves-Nuggets matchup. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I said on the show, I think yesterday, that Houston plus 1.5 or Houston money line at the Jets looked like a good play. I'll tell you what, for the first half of that game, it did. Like they were up, 7-0 at halftime. It was an ugly game. Ultimately, though, what was it? 21-13, I think was the final. I was wrong. I was completely wrong on that one. So hopefully you didn't take my advice. But, check out the Wolves line for Wolves Nuggets tonight. And, any other NBA futures are a ton of fun. Again, right now, if you place a $5 bet as a new customer, you get $150 in bonus bets. If your bet hits, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. More fun with small sample sizes. We talked individual three-point rates. We talked team three-point rate. We talked Julius Randle's three-point percentage. On the flip side of things, Anthony Edwards was 6 of 12 at the free throw line the other day. And he's now 64% for the season from the line. Related to that, Anthony Edwards' free throw rate is also down. Now, I'm less worried about the three-point percentage than I am about the rate. His free throw rate is still the second highest ever in his career. If the season ended right now, it would be much lower than last year, but higher than what it was 2 years ago, his first All-Star season. The percentage, I'm not worried about, but it's notable. He's 64% right now through 4 games. And, 7.5, or actually, how many attempts per game is that? The rate is the better way to look at it, but 6.3 attempts per game. He was 6.4 attempts per game last year, but through 4 games, he's averaging 39 minutes, which is obviously much higher than his 35 minutes last year. But 64%. Last year was a shade under 84%. For his career, he's 79%. He'd been over 75% every season of his career. So I'm not worried about the percentage, and you shouldn't be either. He was 6 for 12. It was miserable. It's inexcusable, and it certainly, it obviously played a factor in losing that game by 6 to the Mavs. But the three-point rate / shot selection is something that I think is a lot more valid to pay attention to. Currently, he's shooting less than 9% of his shots at the rim. Now, 2 years ago, his first All-Star season, that was nearly 30%. In fact, over the first 3 seasons of Anthony Edwards' career, he attempted 29.4% of his shots at the rim. 29.4%. Last year, 22.8%. So down about 6.5 points over where he'd been across the first 3 seasons of his career. This season, through 4 games, 8.9% of his shot attempts are coming within 3 feet of the basket. And I'll say it again. I mean, I know that's the point of the segment, but small sample size theater, right? It's not fire alarm time. But his lack of attempts at the rim are something that is notable. And on the plus side, he's shooting less from mid-range. In fact, less than 8% of his shots are coming in the 10 to 16-foot range, according to Basketball Reference, and less than 8% of his shots are coming in the 16-foot to the three-point arc range, which is down. And it would be, in line with where it was early in his career when he was mostly shooting at the rim and outside the arc. Nearly 60% of his shot attempts have been threes. And I know Stan Van Gundy was lambasting him for this early in the game, and some of the TNT guys were at the NBA and TNT studios. But the dude's shooting 41% from 3. So, if he wants to shoot, how many threes per game is he shooting? Currently, he's shooting 13 threes per game. If he wants to make 41% of his shots from outside the arc, he can shoot 13 a game. I don't care. That's fine. That's not the problem. The problem is he's also not getting to the rim, and then he's not making his free throws when he gets the chance. And we've also seen the turnover rate be far too high. Last year, remember, he decreased the turnover rate, increased the assist rate drastically. Currently, his assist rate is the lowest it's been since his rookie season. The turnover rate is his highest ever. So, small sample size theater. We're not panicking. We're not actually overreacting. I'm giving you the data because it's what we have so far. But saying that we're only 4 games in, and outside of some of the decision-making stuff we've talked about already in the show, there's no real panic button to be pushed here when it comes to Anthony Edwards. I think it's just notable through 4 games. All right. Let's go ahead and dive right into the Wolves Nuggets matchup. I want to spend a bit more time on this one than I do on some of the different game previews, simply because it is Denver, and we saw them in 7 playoff games last year, 4 regular season games, going back the year prior, 5 playoff games. Obviously a divisional opponent, so there's lots to talk about here. Let's quickly set the stage by talking about Denver's offseason and what's changed between these two teams since the playoff series. The most important thing is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is gone now. He's with the Orlando Magic. And he was a super important depth piece for them. Even if the starting lineup is, really their main rotation is otherwise the same. Now, Reggie Jackson's gone too. He was traded this offseason. And Justin Holiday was kind of a fringe rotation guy, didn't play much in the playoffs. But those were all contributors in the regular season that are gone. In their place, the Nuggets signed former Timberwolf Dario Saric and Russell Westbrook as free agents. And they both had, I would say, disappointing is probably a good word in terms of or how I would term their start in Denver this season in their Nuggets career. Now, Saric, I think, has always been kind of hot and cold. You say the same thing about Westbrook. He had a good game the other day, at least scoring wise, but the Nuggets are 2-2. They're dealing with some of these depth changes, we'll call them, or changes that have negatively impacted their depth, is I think probably the best way to say it. To this point in the season, the Nuggets are also 2-2 like the Wolves. They were beat pretty easily by the Thunder at home in the game that opened their season. Followed that up a couple nights later by losing at home to the Clippers by 5. Obviously, Clippers team with no Kawhi. Jokic had a big game in that one, but it didn't matter. And then they went on the road this last week. So they played last Saturday. They lost their first 2 games at home, went on the road at Toronto, and then at Brooklyn Monday, Tuesday. 2 bad teams on the road, though, back-to-back. And they won both games, but it took overtime to do it. Jokic had 40 points in the overtime win against the Raptors and was big in the clutch for them, as he often is. And then turned around the next night, had to play overtime again to win. And Jokic had 29, 18, and 16 in that game in what ended up being a Nuggets win. So they've arrived at the same 2-2 record as the Wolves, obviously getting there in different ways. They've each beaten the Raptors, but the Wolves, playing terribly all the way around and losing to the Lakers, having a bit of a nice, comeback second half and winning on the road at the Kings, pretty easily beating the Raptors, the same Raptors team that the Nuggets struggled with. And then the Nuggets winning an overtime game, kind of eking one out against the Nets. By the way, that final was 144-139, so a very high-scoring game, one in which they had to kind of battle back from. They were down early and had a good middle portion of the game and held on to force overtime toward the end. And then the Wolves, of course, a disappointing performance against the Mavericks that they easily could have won as well. So really, one way to look at this is Denver could easily be 1-3 or 0-4. The Wolves could easily be 4-0, but they're both 2-2. And the Nuggets are 2-0 on the road, too, which I think is notable. Each team's had the same amount of rest this week. They've both been off since Tuesday, had the 2 off days, and now go into the nationally televised game, the 8:30 p.m. Central tip that'll be on ESPN. I want to go through, now that we've kind of set the stage for where these two teams are in the first week and a half of the season, plus the roster moves. Of course, the Wolves roster looks similar, but different in the fact that 2 of their 8 rotation pieces and their second best players now been changed out. The matchup isn't identical anymore, even though we've seen a lot of these teams the last 2 years. The Ant piece and the Jokic piece are the same, and most of the Nuggets starting lineup is the same. But the matchup with no Karl-Anthony Towns, how are the Wolves going to handle Nikola Jokic? And, where do the Wolves find an advantage in this matchup? We'll dig into that a bit here in a moment, going back to last year's playoffs and what worked well for the Wolves. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's plenty of different places or plenty of different things you can find on Gametime, and Gametime Picks curation process makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. No matter what it is you like to attend live, you can find it on Gametime Picks. And the more you use Gametime, the better they'll be at curating what should be most interesting to you. You can also toggle on their all-in pricing feature that allows you to see your total up front, so there's no surprise fees when you get to checkout. Get a panoramic view from your seat as well in the app before you buy with their seat views. And their lowest price guarantee means that Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a better price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. All right, so the first thing that you ask when you look at the Wolves matchup against the Nuggets is who's going to guard Nikola Jokic. Now, it was well documented that even prior to the playoffs last year, Karl Anthony Towns was actually one of the best players in the entire NBA at guarding Nikola Jokic one-on-one. You look at the stats from their matchups. There was a 6-7 years ago, there was a legit debate over who was the better player, who would be better moving forward. Obviously, Jokic won that hands down, but in their head-to-head matchups, it was a lot closer. And compared to some of the other bigs around the league that struggle with Jokic, Cat actually did a great job. Cat's much better against Jokic than he ever has been against a healthy Joel Embiid, for instance. And in the playoffs last year, Cat was far better than Rudy Gobert, anybody else that ended up matched up against Jokic, Kyle Anderson. So the question is, how do the Wolves guard Jokic this time around? Certainly at times, Rudy Gobert will be matched up against him, but Jokic is just his low center of gravity, his ability to use his off arm, his offhand, and his different step through moves and to protect the basketball and flip the ball up on the glass and all those things to get around Rudy Gobert's verticality and Rudy Gobert's length and his normal shot blocking instinct against a normal player. Jokic is abnormal with how extraordinary, right? To use a similar extraordinary in how he goes about scoring the basketball. And like Gobert just doesn't do a great job against Jokic one-on-one, and that's okay because good offense can beat good defense. So what's the best way to slow Jokic down? I think in an ideal scenario, it's still not Rudy Gobert. I think ideally you still have Gobert protecting the rim, helping to guard against those Jokic lobs. We saw the Wolves actually be pretty good early in that series against Denver, those first couple games, at defending the lob that Jokic could throw so well. So if it's not Karl Anthony Towns, who's it going to be? Well, the natural answer is Julius Randle, but Randle doesn't quite have the same size as Towns. Even if he is pound for pound stronger than Karl Anthony Towns, he doesn't have quite the same size and length that Cat has. I think they'll probably still try that. Naz Reid's another one when he's on the floor to guard Jokic one-on-one and then bring help from somewhere. The problem is that Jokic is such a good passer that you don't ever actually want to truly double Jokic, especially not anywhere out near the perimeter. You have to try to make him beat you as a scorer, and he might do that. Like, I want to be clear. I'm not saying like, Jokic can't score. Let him try. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Jokic playing one-on-one against most defenders or against a good defender with help at the rim and Rudy Gobert, you've got a better shot at him scoring less points per possession or the Nuggets scoring less points per possession than you do if you double him and Jokic is just asked to find the open shooter, because he will, or the open cutter, cutting baseline to the basket or what have you. So I think the best option is still put your biggest body on Jokic and just tell him to try and slow him down as best you can. Rudy's roaming the paint, or really roaming the backline, protecting the paint, trying to protect against the lob. And everybody else really has to stay home, but keep your head on a swivel. It's one of the reasons why the Nuggets, their offense has been so successful against the Wolves over the years and against everybody else, is because Minnesota struggles with off-ball defense sometimes. As good as they were on the ball last year, Anthony Edwards, would frequently get cut or beat backdoor. We've seen that happen with Julius Randle, which is maybe another reason why he should be guarding Jokic, because if he's guarding someone else, he's guarding Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon's going to beat him backdoor at least twice in this game if Julius Randle's guarding him. That's just a problem the Wolves, Julius, Anthony Edwards, and others have had in recent years, and in Randle's case over the last, the first 4 games of this season. So, ball pressure on Jokic as much as you can. Keep your head on a swivel off the ball. Don't get beat backdoor. Don't get lulled to sleep and then get a lob thrown over you. We saw Dallas do that in the playoffs and in Tuesday's game against Minnesota. Too many lobs beating the Wolves at the rim, and Jokic is, of course, the best in the league, at least as a big, and not just, I don't want to add that qualifier. He is the best in the league at probably the best overall passer, but also at throwing lobs. They need to be careful with that. Denver overall, a lot of the stuff that I set up the playoff series with last year still rings true. Last season, Denver was dead last in the league in terms of three-point rate as a team. Under a third of their shot attempts were three-pointers last year, 32.3% in the regular season. Sitting here right now, 4 games in, Denver's 20, I believe they're 28th, 29th, the three-point rate. 32.4% of their shot attempts have come from three-point range. That's the exact same number, right? 32.4. Isn't that what I said about last year? 32.3% last year. So they're right in line with last season in terms of three-point rate. Now, they actually are a pretty good three-point shooting team. And Jokic is an interesting one because last year, late in the season and in the playoffs, Jokic really struggled shooting the three ball. In fact, in the playoffs against the Wolves last year, Jokic was 22.9% on threes. He was 8 of 35. He really struggled in the Olympics too. And there was kind of this discourse of like, can Jokic not shoot threes anymore, which seemed a little silly because he's 28. It's not like he's 38. And, he was always just kind of like a pretty average three-point shooter. But if you gave it to him, he could make it. Well, so far this season, he's 55%. He's 11 of 20 through 4 games. And so, they're not taking a lot of threes, but if you leave him open, he can knock them down. Michael Porter Jr. leads them in three-point attempts, but he's under 30% from the field. Jamal Murray, 7 of 20. That's 35%. So, again, they don't shoot a ton of them, but they can make them if you leave them completely wide open. They're still playing at a slow pace, which is not surprising at all. They're bottom 5 in pace, just like they were last year in the regular season. So they're another team that the Wolves, if they could, especially with Rudy off the floor, force the issue. Try to put them on their heels. Try and score in transition because the Nuggets would much rather play slow. Also, Denver, they do so much damage in the mid-range, and a lot of their rim attempts, they're not coming off of dribble drive penetration. They're coming off of these cutters that Jokic is finding. They're coming off of these lobs. So as long as you can stay in front of guys on the perimeter, which the Wolves have struggled a little bit with this year, but shouldn't because they have Jaden and Nikhil and Ant. It's all about, like I said before, keeping your head on a swivel and avoiding some of those passes that Jokic could fire off. But there's a recipe to beating Denver and not allowing them to score so many points. Jokic really has to do it all for them, and especially now with no KCP, a diminished Jamal Murray, at least as of the playoffs last year, and it's too early this year to really be able to tell. And obviously some of the other changes they've undergone in the last couple of years that have kind of sapped their depth. But it's still a matchup for Minnesota that if this is a huge if you could somewhat neutralize Jokic or make him try and beat you as a scorer, which again, he can do. There's a reason he's the best player in the world. If you can limit some of the other stuff, you'll be okay against them. It's a better matchup for Minnesota than Dallas because they can shut down Jamal Murray. They can. Doesn't mean they will 4 times this year in the regular season, but they can. Beyond him, Michael Porter Jr. wasn't able to hurt them in the playoffs. Aaron Gordon is going to do most of his damage off the ball. He's going to do most of his damage off of these Jokic passes. So make Jokic beat you off the dribble, and he might do it, but that's still a better bet than a wide open, Michael Porter Jr. 3-point shot 7 times a game. It was like 4-7 against the Nets. He'll do that to you. You leave him open, he'll do that. Make Jamal Murray beat you off the dribble. Make these guys put the ball on the floor and see if they could beat you that way versus the ball movement way, right? Versus the lobs and the backdoor cuts and all the above. And maybe play a little bit faster. So my keys to this game would be physical with Jokic and keep your head on a swivel off the ball. Defensive rebounding, which, I think I could say every single game. It's not like Denver's a masterful offensive rebounding team. I mean, so far this season, where they offensive rebound rate wise, I think they're pretty middle of the pack. Yeah, they are. They're 14th in offensive rebound rate, but still, I guess a team like Denver, like, even though they're not like lighting the world on fire offensively, don't give them second chance opportunities. So defensive rebounding also is going to be huge, and then do your best to keep them off the free throw line. Denver's 6th in the league in free throw rate offensively, and a huge part of that is Jokic. Yes, he's averaging 7 free throws per game, but Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon are each north of 5 per game too. And Russell Westbrook was 10 of 10 from the line. They went over the Nets the other day. So try their best. The Wolves need to try their best to defend without fouling against this team and limit those second chance opportunities. get out and transition themselves and kind of flip the script. What happened against Dallas the other night? Can the Wolves do that to Denver, put them on their heels in transition, and maybe run them out of the gym a little bit like they did in games 1 and 2 of the second round series last spring? All right. That's all I got for you today here on the show. I'll be back here tonight. It'll be on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. I'll have the audio for you late Friday here on this very same audio feed. But if you want to watch live, myself and Jack Borman, I'll be pinch hitting, hosting the show late Friday. Again, probably a little bit after 11, 11:15, 11:30-ish, following Wolves Nuggets. So check it out. Myself and Jack, audio will be here on this feed. I'll be back on Monday. Talk you through the weekend here. The Wolves have the Spurs on Saturday, so I suppose Monday show will mostly be a post-game pod from Saturday's game against the Spurs. So we'll do all that on Monday morning. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. A reminder that the Locked On Wolves podcast now has a daily newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.